What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The kind of loss that strips your name from mailboxes and your face from framed pictures, leaving you in a world where even strangers refuse to meet your eyes. 12-year-old Madeline Carter didn't think about what she had lost anymore, not because it didn't matter, but because it hurt too much. The late November wind whipped through the city like a warning, blowing through layers of worn sweaters and the single holy scarf she had wrapped twice around her neck. She stood outside the Lexington Avenue shopping strip, the rich folks bustling by in wool coats, too busy, too cold, too tired to see her. Just a kid, maybe invisible, holding a cardboard sign written with a stub of eyeliner she'd found in a trash can, hungry but hopeful. People gave change sometimes, but they never gave eye contact. Her dog, Lucky, curled at her feet, shivering under a torn blanket. Maddie tried not to notice his ribs. Her stomach growled, but she knew Lucky needed the next meal more than she did. Somewhere deep in the honking, grumbling, blinking madness of the city, a shiny black town car pulled up to the curb like it had somewhere more important to be. The rear door swung open, and a man stepped out with shoulders that didn't bend. His jaw was tight like he was clenching secrets. His coat was custom, his shoes clean, his face the kind people pretended not to recognize in public. Jonathan Blake. Everyone knew him, the millionaire real estate guy who turned old buildings into glass palaces. The kind of man who was used to getting his way. But Maddie didn't care about any of that. She saw the boy first. The boy in the wheelchair. Maybe 9, maybe 10. His brown hair flopped over one eye, and he looked down like he didn't want to be seen either. Maddie's sign dropped. Her eyes locked onto the boy's motionless legs. Something rose inside her. An ache, a certainty, like a forgotten truth bursting back to life. Without thinking, she stepped off the curb and approached them. Jonathan raised his arm sharply, protectively, like he expected her to be trouble. Maddie didn't stop. Her voice was clear but soft, like she knew the power of what she was about to say. "Sir," she began, and the cold air seemed to still, "I can make your son walk again." For a full 2 seconds, no one said anything. The father turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp with suspicion and something else, something almost like fear. Daniel, the boy, blinked. Then looked away. "What did you say?" Jonathan asked, his voice low and icy. Maddie didn't flinch. "I said I can help him. I know I can. Just give me one chance." Her fingers trembled at her sides, not from fear but from the sheer size of what she was doing. The man narrowed his eyes. "You're what, 12? A beggar? You think this is funny?" Maddie shook her head. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've helped people before. I don't know how. I just do. Please. Let me try." Jonathan looked her up and down, probably seeing nothing but a skinny, dirty girl with wild hair and stubborn eyes. Then he laughed. But it wasn't the warm kind of laugh. "Is this a scam? Someone filming this? You think this is a game?" Maddie stepped closer. "No camera. No scam. I just need a week. 1 week with him. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away and never bother you again. But if I'm right," her voice broke a little. "If I'm right, your son walks." Daniel looked up now. For the first time. His eyes weren't cold like his father's. They were tired. Broken. But somewhere in there, was that curiosity. Hope. A beat passed. Then another. Jonathan opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Maddie added gently, "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" She smiled just barely, then added, "Sometimes, hope comes in dirty shoes." Jonathan stared at her, frozen, like something inside him had been rattled. The wind picked up again, but no one moved. He looked at his son, who gave the faintest nod. Not a yes. Not belief. Just a silent dare. Jonathan turned back to Maddie and said 3 words that would change everything. 1 week. Prove it. Maddie's knees went weak. She whispered, "Thank you," and promised herself she wouldn't waste this. As the driver helped Daniel back into the car, Jonathan nodded toward the passenger side. "Get in." "But if you even breathe wrong around my son, I won't," Maddie interrupted, and her voice carried something ancient and kind. "I'm here to help. That's all." The door shut. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the cardboard sign and the blanket and everything she had known until now. Lucky sat on the sidewalk, wagging his tail, as if he knew this wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something bigger. Something none of them could explain. And for the first time in years, Maddie felt warm. The first memory Maddie Carter ever had was of a hallway filled with shouting. It was always dark in that place, always humming with broken lights and voices that never said kind things. She remembered her mother's fingers wrapped tight around her wrist, dragging her through the cracked linoleum, muttering words Maddie didn't understand then but had come to recognize as warnings. Her mother was beautiful once, with long dark hair and eyes that could switch from soft to steel in seconds. But whatever warmth used to live inside her had burned out long ago, replaced by cigarette smoke and late-night whispers to strange men who never stayed long. Maddie never knew her father. She'd asked once and gotten slapped so hard she didn't ask again. Instead, she created her own stories. Maybe he was a soldier, or a magician, or someone important who would one day come looking for her and say, "I'm sorry I was late." But the days came and went, and the apartment emptied itself one light bulb at a time until it was just Maddie and her mom, living off ramen and rage, love showing up only in apology pancakes and 2 tight hugs after the yelling was over. When Maddie was 8, her mother disappeared. One night she said she was going out for cigarettes and never came back. Maddie waited 3 whole days before someone knocked on the door and found her curled up under the kitchen table, too scared to cry. The state took her in, shuffled her from one foster home to another, always temporary, always, until we find a better placement. Some houses were kind. Most were crowded. A few were worse than anything she'd known before. She learned to be small, to be quiet, to be invisible. She stole books from libraries and read by moonlight. She taught herself to sew buttons, to cook rice, to fix broken laces with string. At 9, she ran away. She didn't do it out of anger. She did it because she finally realized no one was coming. Not her mom. Not her dad. Not anyone. But she could take care of herself. She had to. The streets were cruel at first. Cold benches. Empty bellies. Eyes that followed her like wolves. But Maddie had something most people didn't see, a kind of light inside her, faint but steady. She believed in things other people had given up on. One rainy night, she found Lucky. He was just a puppy then, all ribs and trembling fur, hiding under a dumpster behind a bakery. She fed him half a sandwich she'd been saving for herself and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I'm nobody too." From that day on, they were a team. Lucky kept her warm at night, barked when someone got too close, and licked her face on mornings she didn't want to get up. He wasn't just a dog. He was family. They slept in shelters sometimes, when the lines weren't too long. Other times, they huddled in abandoned buses or alleyways. Maddie avoided the places where kids disappeared and stayed close to neighborhoods where people smiled, even if they didn't stop. One winter, when Maddie was 10, she met the old woman. She never knew her name, just that she had silver hair like moonlight and eyes that looked like they saw through time. She found Maddie coughing behind a laundromat and brought her inside, gave her tea and a wool blanket that smelled like lavender. "You have a gift, child," the woman had said. Maddie blinked through her fever. "What gift?" "You see pain," the woman answered softly. "And you don't turn away. That's rare. Maddie thought she was just being nice, but before the woman disappeared the next morning, she pressed a smooth stone into Maddie's hand. It was small, blue, and warm like it had been in sunlight. "When it glows," she said, "someone near you is ready to be healed." Maddie didn't understand. She thought maybe it was just a trick, a weird goodbye. But a week later, she met a man in the park who couldn't speak from trauma. She sat with him, told him stories, just talking to fill the silence. 2 days later, he thanked her out loud. After that, Maddie stopped questioning. She believed. Not in magic, but in something deeper, call it faith, energy, God, she didn't know. She just knew that sometimes when people were near her, they started to believe again, and things began to change. She never charged anyone. She didn't call herself a healer. She just helped when she could. A woman who hadn't walked in months moved her toes after Maddie rubbed her ankles and told her she was beautiful. A boy who hadn't spoken since his sister died whispered, "Thank you," after Maddie held his hand through a nightmare. None of it made sense, but it didn't have to. It worked. And Maddie believed that maybe, just maybe, this was the reason she'd been left behind. Because she was meant to help others find their way. Still, she was just a kid. There were nights she cried until her chest hurt. Days she went without food. Times she almost gave up. But she kept going, not because she was brave, but because there was no other choice. Giving up wasn't an option. Lucky needed her. And somewhere deep down, a voice always whispered, "You're meant for more." She carried that voice like a secret, close to her chest, tucked under her scarf. Every person who passed by her on the street, she looked in their eyes and wondered, "Is it you? Are you the one I'm supposed to help today?" Most kept walking. But then came the boy in the wheelchair. And the man with the haunted face. Something about them felt different. The moment Maddie saw Daniel, her fingers tingled. Her pocket warmed. She touched the stone. It glowed, faint but sure. That's how she knew. This boy was the reason she was still on this earth. And somehow, she was going to help him. She didn't know how. Didn't need to. Faith doesn't require proof. Just the courage to keep going, even when the road ahead looks impossible. As the town car drove her through streets she'd only walked before, Maddie pressed her forehead to the window and watched the city blur past. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking for a place to sleep. She was heading toward a purpose. Her hands were still dirty. Her clothes still smelled like last night's rain. But inside her, a flame had been lit. One that whispered, louder now, "This is where everything changes." Jonathan Blake didn't believe in second chances. Not in life, not in business, not in love. In his world, second chances were just proof someone had messed up the first time, and he had no patience for mistakes. Every corner of his world was polished, calculated, efficient. His apartment was steel and glass, his wardrobe tailored to perfection, and even his coffee was ordered on the dot, black, no sugar, no foam. Nothing about him bent or wavered. People respected him because he never faltered. People feared him because he never forgave. The man the world saw was a titan of property, a New York power broker with fingers in everything from skyscrapers to high-end condos. He built his empire by buying buildings no one wanted and turning them into gold. People said he had the Midas touch. But what they didn't say, what they couldn't know, was that the real Jonathan Blake had died 3 years ago, on a rainy night that took more than just his peace of mind. He remembered it in fragments. The screech of tires. The sound of metal twisting like paper. A scream that wasn't his but felt like it came from inside him. Then silence. His wife, Emma, was gone before the ambulance even arrived. His son, Daniel, survived, but the doctor said he'd never walk again. Spinal cord damage. Permanent. Jonathan didn't cry. Not then. Not at the funeral. Not in the months that followed when he buried himself in meetings and mergers and million-dollar deals. He built a new life with walls no one could climb. He hired the best therapists, bought the best equipment, remodeled his penthouse into a physical therapy haven. But nothing worked. Daniel stopped talking. Stopped smiling. Stopped hoping. Jonathan couldn't fix it, and that was the one failure he didn't know how to carry. So he stopped trying. Not with words, but in his own way, he shut down everything that didn't have a solution. Love was not a solution. Hope was not a solution. And most of all, little girls on sidewalks offering miracles were not a solution. He should have ignored her. He wanted to. But when she said those words, "I can make your son walk again," something cracked. He couldn't admit it then, not even to himself, but in that instant, a memory surged up from the depths. Emma's voice. Laughing, soft, insistent. One day, she had told him, "Our son's going to run so fast we won't be able to catch him. Don't be afraid to believe in impossible things, John. Miracles just need the right invitation." He'd laughed at her then. Called her a dreamer. She just kissed his cheek and said, "That's why you married me, isn't it?" And now here he was, 3 years later, standing on a city sidewalk letting some filthy street kid with 2 big eyes and tangled hair tell him what his team of neurologists and scientists and therapists had failed to do. He should have walked away. But Daniel had looked up. Just for a second. Just enough for Jonathan to see something stir behind the fog in his son's eyes. That's why he agreed. Not because he believed her. Because Daniel had blinked. And Jonathan hadn't seen his son blink like that in months. Still, he didn't trust her. How could he? The girl reeked of the streets, of desperation, of stories that changed with every breath. She had no credentials, no family, no logic. Yet she sat quietly in the back seat of his town car like she belonged there, like she had just as much right to the leather and silence and glass-tinted world he had built. Daniel didn't speak. He rarely did anymore. He just watched her with curious detachment, like trying to decide if she was real. Jonathan caught him stealing glances, then pretending not to look. The penthouse greeted them with automatic lights and untouched stillness. The foyer alone was larger than most people's homes, and everything was spotless, cold, and silent. Maddie's shoes left faint prints on the marble. She took it all in with wide eyes but said nothing. She didn't seem impressed or overwhelmed. Just curious. Jonathan noticed that. She didn't ask for food or money. She didn't marvel at the high ceilings or the glass elevator. She just followed Daniel's chair as it wheeled silently through the hall and into the main living room. "You'll stay in the guest room," Jonathan said sharply. "No wandering. No touching anything unless told." "And if you lie, I won't," Maddie said without flinching. "I didn't come here to lie." "Everyone says that," he muttered. "Then they do. Then let me prove I'm different." Jonathan studied her for a long second, then turned away. "The maid will show you where to sleep. Be ready at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Daniel has therapy. You'll watch. Not interfere. Understood?" "Understood," Maddie replied. She watched him go, disappearing down a hallway of shadows, and she wondered what had broken him so badly that even hope felt like a threat. Daniel rolled to the window and stared out. Maddie joined him, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his chair. "It's a good view," she said. "All the lights make it feel like the stars came down to visit." Daniel didn't answer. But he didn't roll away either. That was something. Maddie sat quietly, letting the silence wrap around them like a blanket. She didn't need words. Sometimes the heart hears better without them. She pulled the small stone from her pocket and felt its warmth. Not glowing yet. But pulsing. Waiting. She looked at Daniel. "You don't have to talk," she whispered. "But I know you're in there. And I'm not afraid of whatever's behind your silence. He looked at her then. Just for a second. And Maddie saw it again. That flicker. Like a light buried under rubble, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to let it breathe. Upstairs, Jonathan stood in his office, watching the security feed. He saw the girl sitting by the window. Saw his son looking at her. Something twisted in his chest. He hated it. Hated how it made him feel things he had spent 3 years burying. She was just a kid. She couldn't fix anything. Miracles weren't real. But deep in the pit of his stomach, something stirred. Something terrifying. Hope. Rain fell in thin, steady sheets the next morning, making the city feel quieter, like it was listening. Inside the Blake penthouse, the air was thick with silence and rules. Maddie woke early, not because she was told to, but because she always did. Life on the street taught her that sleeping too long made you a target, and she'd never unlearned that. The bed in the guest room was too soft, like sleeping inside a cloud that didn't want her there. She folded the sheets neatly and stood at the window, watching the rain run down the glass like tears that couldn't be wiped away. Downstairs, Jonathan was already in a tailored suit, phone to his ear, voice clipped and direct. He glanced at Maddie but said nothing as she passed. Daniel was waiting in the therapy room, a sleek white space with polished wood floors, machines lined up like soldiers, and a mirrored wall that reflected how far he hadn't come. The therapist, Angela, was a gentle woman with patient eyes and tired hands. She raised an eyebrow when she saw Maddie but didn't ask. Jonathan stood with his arms folded, watching like a judge waiting for someone to slip. Maddie kept her distance as instructed, but she watched Daniel closely. He didn't try. Not really. He went through the motions like someone whose body had betrayed him one too many times. Angela adjusted his legs, encouraged his posture, but his eyes stayed blank, detached from the world. Maddie could feel it, the heaviness in the room, the way even the light seemed dimmer near him. He wasn't broken by the injury. He was broken by the belief that nothing would ever change. After therapy, Jonathan called Maddie into the study. She stood in front of his desk, her hands steady, though her heart pounded like it always did before something big. "You saw what I saw," he said. "Nothing. No progress. No miracle." Maddie didn't flinch. "Because you're trying to fix his legs when what's broken is deeper." "Don't talk like you know anything about him," Jonathan snapped. "You've been here less than 24 hours. And in 24 hours, she said quietly, he looked at me. That's something, isn't it?" Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "I gave you 1 week. You've got 6 days left. Impress me, or it's over." Maddie nodded once. "Deal." But deep down, she knew this wasn't about impressing him. This was about reaching Daniel, not with treatments or machines, but with something no one had offered him since the accident, belief. That afternoon, while Jonathan locked himself in his office with investors, Maddie sat beside Daniel in the library, reading aloud from an old adventure book she'd found on the shelf. At first, he stared straight ahead like always, but as her voice rose and fell, she noticed his eyes flick toward her, then the page, then back again. When she read a funny part, he snorted. It was small, barely a sound, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks always grow. She stopped reading and smiled. "You like stories?" Daniel shrugged, but his eyes betrayed him. "Me too," Maddie said. "They remind me that bad chapters don't mean the whole book is ruined." He looked at her then, longer than he ever had, and she saw it again, that flicker, faint and flickering like candlelight on the edge of a breeze. She reached into her pocket and touched the stone. Still warm. Not glowing. But waiting. She didn't need it to glow yet. Hope came slowly. That night, the rain stopped just long enough for the clouds to break open into stars. Maddie stood on the balcony with Daniel, wrapped in a blanket, their breath visible in the cold air. You ever think about what it feels like to fly? She asked. Daniel blinked. You know, like running so fast you forget your body exists. He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. I think you used to feel like that, she added. And I think you will again. He turned away. They all say that, he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Maddie's heart jumped. Words. His voice. Maybe, she said gently. But I'm not them. The next morning, the penthouse woke to chaos. A major deal of Jonathan's had fallen through, something about a last-minute investor pulling out, millions lost overnight. He yelled into his phone, barking orders, pacing like a storm trapped in human form. Maddie kept her distance, but she watched. Not just the anger, but the way his hands trembled when no one was looking. He wasn't just angry. He was afraid. Daniel refused to go to therapy that morning. Locked himself in his room and said nothing. Jonathan snapped. This is what I get for letting some child play house in my life. Maddie stepped forward. He's not a project. He's your son. Jonathan turned on her, face dark with fury. And you're a homeless nobody who knows nothing about what it's like to lose everything you love. She didn't move. You think I haven't lost anything? Her voice was quiet but sharp. You think I don't know what it feels like to scream in silence? I live that every day. But I still believe. And maybe that's what he needs. Jonathan's jaw clenched. If you can do something, then do it. But if this is all smoke and sentiment, I want you gone. Maddie nodded. Then take me to where it happened. The accident. I need to understand. He blinked. Why? Because if you want me to reach him, she said, I have to feel what broke him. Against his better judgment, he agreed. They drove in silence. Out of the city. Down winding roads slick with new rain. Past old trees and forgotten fences until they reached the stretch of highway where the world had ended for Jonathan Blake. He pointed. There. The curve. The deer. I was driving. Emma screamed. Then everything went black. He stared at the road, eyes hollow. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Maddie stepped out of the car and stood on the shoulder. She closed her eyes and imagined it, the sharp turn, the fear, the metal, the silence. She breathed it in, then opened her eyes and turned to Jonathan. This is where you lost your family. But it's not where you lost your son. He's still here. Waiting. But he can't come back if you keep living like he's already gone. Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time, something cracked in his perfect mask. What if I don't know how to come back either? Maddie stepped forward, pressed the warm stone into his hand, and whispered, then maybe we both need a miracle. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Not a storm this time. Just a cleansing. A deal in the rain. The drive back to the city was silent, but it wasn't the same silence they'd known before. It had changed shape, less like a wall and more like a wound, open and raw. Jonathan gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and Maddie stared out the window, replaying the images in her head, not of the accident itself but of the invisible wreckage it had left behind. She didn't know what was harder, surviving something traumatic or surviving the world's expectation that you should already be over it. When they reached the penthouse, it felt colder than before. Not in temperature, but in spirit. A house of glass and perfection, beautiful but empty, like a museum built by someone who no longer believed in beauty. Maddie walked through the room slowly, taking it in with fresh eyes. Every surface gleamed, every chair was arranged with ruthless precision, and the windows, though offering breathtaking views, reflected only solitude. It wasn't just the building that was made of glass, it was Jonathan. Fragile under the weight of being untouchable. Maddie found Daniel in his room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him. She knocked once on the door frame. He looked over but didn't speak. She walked in and sat on the floor again, her knees to her chest, like she always did, never asking for more space than he was willing to give. "Your dad took me to the place where it happened," she said softly. Daniel didn't react, but she saw his fingers twitch. It was quiet out there. You could still feel the fear in the air, like it hadn't left yet. Like it was waiting for someone to finish grieving. He turned his head toward her, barely. "Do you miss her?" Maddie asked. His jaw clenched. His voice came out like sandpaper. "Every day." Maddie nodded. "I miss mine too. She wasn't perfect, but she was the only one who ever looked at me like I mattered. When she left, I didn't think I'd ever matter to anyone again." Daniel looked at her fully now. "Did she die?" Maddie shook her head. "Worse." She walked away. The room fell into that heavy, sacred quiet that only came when two people shared a truth so deep it didn't need fixing. After a long moment, Maddie pulled out a tiny journal she kept folded in her coat. It was old, the pages soft from being opened and closed too many times. "Wanna see something weird?" she asked. Daniel nodded, just barely. She opened to a page near the back and showed him sketches, crude drawings of feet, legs, pressure points, energy paths. "A woman I met taught me this. She said the body holds memory in places we never think to look. That healing sometimes starts in the parts we forget to pay attention to." Daniel blinked. "It's not science," Maddie admitted, "but it's worked. Sometimes when I touch someone's hands or feet, something shifts. I don't know how. But I think it's more than pressure. I think it's listening through your skin." Daniel reached out slowly and touched the edge of the paper. It was the first time he'd reached for anything in front of her. A single touch, but it said everything. She smiled. "Can I try something? If it's too weird, you can tell me to stop." He didn't answer, but he didn't say no. That was enough. Maddie got up, moved to the edge of his chair, and gently lifted one of his feet onto her lap. She worked slowly, pressing her thumbs into the arch, the heel, the ball, not like a masseuse, but like someone reading Braille written in pain. Daniel didn't flinch, but his breathing shifted. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore, it hummed. After 10 minutes, she moved to the other foot. Still nothing obvious. But she saw color return to his cheeks. His eyes were more alert. When she was done, she looked up. "Anything?" Daniel hesitated. "I felt something." "Good or bad?" "Not bad," he whispered. That night, Jonathan watched the security footage again. It had become his habit, his way of knowing what went on when he wasn't in the room. He didn't trust easily, especially not with Daniel. But what he saw surprised him. His son, his silent, empty son, had let her touch him. Had spoken. Had reached out. Jonathan sat back in his chair, heart pounding. He wasn't ready to call it hope. But it was the first time in 3 years he didn't feel completely alone in the house. Later, Maddie found herself wandering the halls after midnight. She couldn't sleep. Too much energy, too many thoughts bouncing around. She ended up in the kitchen, staring at the massive fridge filled with food she didn't feel right taking. She pulled a banana and sat at the counter, peeling it slowly. She wasn't used to food being just there. Jonathan walked in suddenly, no tie, sleeves rolled up, surprising her. They locked eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too quiet. The kind of quiet that gets loud." He walked to the fridge, poured himself a glass of water. "You know," he said carefully, "when I first met you, I thought you were insane." "You still might be right," she said with a grin. He almost smiled. "But now," he paused, weighing his words. "Now I wonder if you're exactly what this place needed." Maddie looked down. "I'm not a miracle worker. I'm just a girl trying not to disappear." He let you touch him today, Jonathan said. That's a miracle in my book. She didn't respond. Just looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. Do you believe in anything, Mr. Blake? He took a sip of water, then replied quietly, I used to. Then life gave me reasons not to. Maybe you just stopped seeing the reasons to keep going. He looked at her for a long time. And you? Why haven't you given up? Maddie set her banana down. Because if I do, who's gonna help the next kid who can't believe for themselves? Jonathan stared at her, this strange girl who had wandered into his life like a whisper, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like closing the door. She got up, walked past him, but paused at the doorway. Your house is beautiful, she said without turning. But maybe it's time to make it feel like a home again. Then she disappeared into the hall, leaving Jonathan alone in a kitchen full of things he'd bought to fill the emptiness. And now, for the first time, he realized what it had all cost him. Maddie woke before sunrise again, though this time, it wasn't the old fear that pulled her from sleep, it was a sense of something new waiting. Not excitement, not exactly, but anticipation. She got dressed in the same oversized hoodie and jeans she'd worn since the beginning, brushed her hair with her fingers, and padded barefoot into the quiet penthouse. It still felt cold, like a place meant for watching life from a distance, not living it. But there were tiny changes now, ones she could feel. A door left slightly open. A coffee cup left out on the counter. The quiet didn't echo as much. She made her way to Daniel's room and knocked gently before entering. He was already up, dressed in a soft flannel and sweatpants, his chair turned toward the window, sunlight bleeding in from the edges. He looked back at her, not startled, not closed off. Just tired and curious. Morning, she said. He nodded. You okay if we do something different today? She asked. I promise it's not weird. Well, maybe just a little. He gave her the faintest eye roll. Weird's kind of your brand. Maddie laughed, caught off guard. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me this week. She wheeled him down the hallway, past the therapy room, past the gym, all the way to the front doors. We're going outside, she said. Fresh air is underrated. Daniel hesitated. My dad won't know if we're back before lunch, she said quickly. And even if he does, I'll take the heat. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You always this reckless? Only when it matters. They took the private elevator down and stepped out into a different kind of morning. The city was still wiping the sleep from its eyes, the streets slick from overnight rain, the sidewalks slowly filling with people chasing something. Maddie guided Daniel through quieter blocks, away from crowds, toward a small park tucked between tall buildings like a secret. She found a bench near a fountain and parked his chair beside it. Birds chirped, the air smelled like wet grass, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Why here? He asked softly. Because the world keeps moving whether we show up for it or not, she said. But sometimes, sitting still in the middle of it helps us remember we're still a part of it. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. That was progress. Close your eyes, she said. Just listen. Daniel looked skeptical. Seriously? Trust me. After a pause, he obeyed. They sat like that for a while. In silence. In peace. The fountain splashed behind them. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, someone was playing a saxophone with aching, golden notes. You ever think, Maddie whispered, that maybe the reason some people hurt for so long is because they forget what peace sounds like? Daniel's eyes opened slowly. I remember that sound, he said, voice small. From before. She looked at him. What do you miss the most? He thought for a long moment. Running. Not just the movement. The way it felt to chase something just because it was there. The wind, the ache in my chest, the freedom. Maddie nodded. I never had that. Not like you did. But I think we both lost something we're still looking for. She reached down and gently touched his ankle, right where the bone curved into muscle. When I touch people, I listen, she said softly. Not with my ears, with my hands. The body holds memories, even when the mind lets go. Daniel didn't pull away. His eyes closed again. She pressed carefully into the spot, slow, firm circles. Then moved to the other foot. Still nothing dramatic. No miracles. But his face softened. His shoulders dropped. And when she finished, he looked more present than he had since she met him. I felt something warm, he said. Like a tiny light. Maddie smiled. That's the first spark. We build on that. When they returned, Jonathan was pacing in the hallway. His face twisted when he saw them. Where were you? He snapped. We've had this conversation. We went to the park, Maddie said calmly. Daniel needed air. And space. That's not your decision to make, he said sharply. Actually, Daniel interrupted, surprising them both, it kind of is. I told her I wanted to go. Jonathan froze. The sound of his son's voice, not just noise, but conviction, stopped him like a slap. You spoke, he asked. Yes, Daniel said. I speak. I just stopped trying because no one listened. The words landed like stones. Jonathan looked at Maddie, but she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just met his gaze and said, he's still in there. You just have to meet him where he is. Jonathan stepped back slightly, as if realizing he'd built a house around his son instead of a home. What did you do to him? He asked. I sat still, she said. That's all. It's more than anyone else has done. That night, dinner felt different. Jonathan invited Maddie to join them at the table, a first. It was quiet, still strange, but less strained. Daniel even cracked a joke about the two fancy napkins, and Maddie laughed, and Jonathan, he smiled. Just a little. Just enough. Afterward, Daniel asked to see the stars again. They stood on the balcony, the city glittering below, the sky barely visible through light pollution but still stubborn enough to let one or two stars peek through. What do you think is out there? Daniel asked. Everything we can't explain, Maddie said. And maybe all the answers we forgot how to ask. He nodded slowly. You really think I can walk again? She turned to him, serious. I think your body's waiting on your heart to believe it's still worth trying. And I think your heart's waiting on someone to believe in you first. Daniel looked at her. You believe in me? With everything I've got. In the hallway, just out of sight, Jonathan listened. For the first time since the accident, he let himself feel it, not hope exactly, but the ache of something just before hope. The feeling of thaw. The next morning, the sky was the color of bruised steel, thick clouds rolling in low and slow, pressing against the city like something heavy trying to suffocate it. Jonathan stood at the tall windows of his office, phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and distant as he paced, firing off instructions to a legal team on one line, issuing quiet threats to a contractor on another. Maddie passed by, silently watching him, and felt it, something more than pressure from business or deadlines. It was personal. It was tightening around his shoulders like a rope, coiling closer each hour. He looked like a man whose walls were starting to hear his thoughts. In Daniel's room, Maddie found him awake, already sitting up, dressed himself, awkwardly, but without help. That alone would have shocked the staff, but Maddie didn't act surprised. She only smiled, handed him a juice box, and said, "Want to try something new?" He nodded, without hesitation this time. In the therapy room, they pushed aside the machines. Maddie unrolled an old, frayed yoga mat she had found in a closet. She sat on the floor, gestured for Daniel to join her. Not on the mat, not yet, but beside it. We're going to stretch, she said. Your body's been frozen so long, we've got to melt it piece by piece. Think of it like waking up muscles instead of forcing them. Daniel's eyebrows twitched. That sounds made up. Everything real sounds made up until it works, she replied. Maddie worked slowly, guiding him with words and small movements, touching his feet gently, rotating his ankles, pressing into pressure points she had memorized from the old woman in the alley who once told her, the body stores every sorrow in its joints. With each point she touched, Daniel exhaled more fully. She could see it happening, not a miracle, not even motion, but presence. The spark was growing. His eyes followed her hands, and when she asked him to breathe deeply, he actually did. That afternoon, thunder rolled above the city. Not the sharp crack of a passing storm, but the long, rumbling kind that made windows tremble and reminded people they were small. Jonathan came home early, his suit soaked at the shoulders, hair damp, and something sharp in his posture. Maddie saw it as he passed, something worse than stress. She followed him down the hallway. You okay? She asked carefully. He didn't answer, just walked into the study and shut the door, not quite slamming it. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then Maddie knocked. He didn't tell her to go away, which was permission enough. She stepped inside and found him standing at his desk, glass in hand, drink untouched, face pale. What happened? She asked. He stared at a folder on the desk. My father died this morning. Maddie blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said bitterly. He was already dead to me. He picked up the folder and tossed it aside. It slid across the desk and landed near her. He left me nothing but debts. I built my empire with my own hands. You know what he left, Daniel? A letter. 1 page. Not even signed. Maddie stepped closer. What did it say? It said, you'll be better without me. Your father's too much like me anyway. Jonathan's voice cracked at the end. As if he was doing us a favor by staying away. She watched his hands clench, veins rising in his arms. I spent my whole life proving I wasn't him, he said. I built walls to make sure I never let anyone down like he did. But now I look at Daniel and I wonder, if I'm just the same ghost in a better suit. Maddie moved closer. You're not, she said firmly. You stayed. That makes you different. He turned on her, anger flickering behind his eyes. But I didn't fix it. I didn't save him. What kind of father lets his son suffer like this? The kind who's human, Maddie said. And still learning. Jonathan sank into the chair behind the desk. For a moment, he looked like a child, too small for the space he'd built. He used to laugh, he said softly. All the time. At everything. He had this big, loud laugh. It filled the whole apartment. After Emma died, I kept trying to bring it back. But everything I did, therapy, gadgets, tutors, it just made him quieter. Maddie sat on the edge of the desk, careful not to interrupt. Maybe he didn't need solutions. Maybe he needed space to feel sad. And someone willing to sit in it with him. Jonathan looked up. How do you know all this? She hesitated, then said, because no one ever sat with me in mine. I had to learn the hard way. What I needed. What I never got. He studied her face. Who are you, Maddie? She looked away, swallowed. Someone who's trying not to disappear. A long silence passed. Then Jonathan whispered, thank you. Not loudly. Not proudly. But honestly. That night, lightning lit up the city in flashes. Maddie stood at the balcony again, the storm painting the sky in white fire. Daniel joined her quietly. He wheeled up beside her and asked, do you think storms remember where they've been? She thought about that. Maybe they don't have to. Maybe the places remember them instead. He was quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you ever feel like you're waiting to be someone else?" Maddie looked at him. "Every day. But maybe the point isn't becoming someone else. Maybe it's remembering who you were before the world started telling you who to be." Daniel blinked. "That sounds like something my mom would have said." Maddie's chest tightened. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "You would have," he said. She liked people who didn't pretend. Thunder rolled again. The wind picked up. Maddie turned to him. "Tomorrow, I want to try something new. Something physical." "Walking?" he asked, hopeful. "Not yet. But standing. With help. Just a little weight on your legs. Just enough to remind them what they're for." He hesitated. "What if I fall?" "Then we fall together," she said. "And get back up. That's the deal." He nodded slowly. And for the first time, it wasn't a child agreeing to an adult. It was two people choosing to try, in spite of everything. Behind them, the storm raged on. But inside, something steadier had begun to stir. The storm inside was no longer just pain. It was movement. It was fire. It was the first sign of life breaking through. The next morning, the storm was gone, but it had left the world soaked and raw, like something had been washed away and the city didn't quite know what to do with itself. Sunlight poked between the clouds in hesitant beams, landing in golden streaks across the penthouse floors. Maddie stood in the hallway outside Daniel's room with her heart pounding in her ears. Today wasn't like other days. Today was the day they'd try something real. Something visible. She knocked, waited. When the door opened, Daniel looked ready, not confident, not excited, but ready in that quiet, fragile way people look when they know they can't afford to hope too much. "Still want to try?" she asked. "I do," he said, voice steady. "Even if I fall." They wheeled together to the therapy room, which still smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon-scented polish. The machines stood by like silent onlookers. Angela had been given the morning off. Maddie wanted this to be between them. No doctors, no professionals, just trust and grit. She rolled out the old mat again and moved Daniel into position near the padded parallel bars. "Okay," she said softly. "Here's how this works. I help you shift forward. You put your weight on me. You'll feel like you can't, but you can. Just for a second. Just enough to remind your body what standing feels like." Daniel swallowed hard. "I'm scared." "Me too," she said, and smiled. "That's how I know it matters." She guided him carefully, her hands under his arms, body pressed close for support, her legs braced. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, his fingers gripped the bars. His shoulders shook. 3. She lifted with him, and he pushed against the chair, teeth clenched. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then everything did. His legs locked. His knees held. He rose, trembling but upright. Not fully standing. Not straight. But no longer sitting. They froze there, breathless. Daniel's eyes went wide. Maddie tightened her hold. "You're doing it," she whispered. "You're standing." He let out a sound that was halfway between a sob and a laugh. "I forgot what it felt like. The ground under my feet." Maddie steadied him as his legs began to wobble. "Okay, back down. Easy." She lowered him slowly, and he collapsed into the chair, panting, face flushed. But his eyes burned with something new. Fire. "That wasn't nothing," he said. "No. That was everything." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he said, "I want to do it again." And so they did. Twice more. Each time shorter than the first, but each time he stood longer before gravity claimed him. His muscles screamed. His face twisted in pain. But he didn't stop. He didn't say no. Later, when they returned to the main living area, Maddie helped Daniel into his chair, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and handed him a glass of water. She was about to sit down when they both heard the sound of slow applause from behind them. Jonathan stood at the far end of the hall, his expression unreadable, hands slowly coming together. "You stood," he said quietly. Daniel blinked, unsure whether to be proud or embarrassed. Jonathan stepped forward. "I saw the footage from the security cam. I didn't mean to invade. I couldn't believe it." Daniel looked down. "It wasn't a big deal." "Yes," Jonathan said, walking closer. "Yes, it was." He knelt beside his son, something he hadn't done in years, and looked him in the eye. "You don't have to do this for me. You don't have to prove anything." Daniel frowned. "I'm not. I'm doing it for me. And maybe, for her." He looked at Maddie. Jonathan followed his gaze, then nodded. "You're stronger than I ever knew." Maddie watched this exchange, her heart full and strange. She stood up to give them space, but Jonathan stopped her. "Stay," he said. "Please." They sat together, father, son, and stranger. But in that moment, it didn't feel like that. It felt like something was healing. That afternoon, Maddie went to the rooftop alone. It was windy, but clear. She pulled out the smooth stone from her pocket, held it in her hand. It hadn't glowed in days, but she could feel something humming beneath the surface, like it was waiting. "If you're still listening," she whispered, "he stood today. Not because of me. Because he chose to." She closed her eyes. "I think I needed that more than he did." Downstairs, Daniel asked to call someone. Jonathan handed him a phone without hesitation. Daniel called Emma's sister, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. The conversation was short, awkward, but healing. She cried. He didn't. He just said, "I'm trying." And that was enough. That evening, Jonathan made dinner. It was awkward. He burned the bread. Overcooked the chicken. But he tried. Maddie helped without being asked. Daniel made sarcastic comments. Jonathan rolled his eyes. They laughed. And for the first time in years, they sat together around the table not like survivors, but like a family trying to learn how to live again. After dinner, they played a board game Maddie found in a closet. Daniel lost spectacularly but laughed so hard he cried. Jonathan cheated twice, got caught both times. Maddie beat them both and did a dance so ridiculous it made Daniel choke on his soda. When the laughter faded and the lights dimmed, Maddie sat on the balcony alone again. But this time, she wasn't lonely. She was full. She looked up at the sky, searched for the stars. Found one. The brightest one. "He stood today," she said out loud. "And so did I." Behind her, Jonathan stood in the shadows. He didn't say anything. He just listened. The way good fathers learn to do when the storm finally passes. The morning sun slipped through the curtains like a slow promise, casting soft light over the penthouse, but inside the walls, something unsettled stirred. Daniel sat near the window, arms folded, eyes distant. Maddie noticed his silence before anyone else did. It was different from the quiet that came with exhaustion or contemplation. This was waiting. Anticipation mixed with an edge of unease. Jonathan, ever the businessman, barely glanced up from his emails, absorbed in the relentless demands of his empire. Maddie approached Daniel cautiously, sitting beside him. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He shook his head, barely perceptible. "There's someone coming," he said finally. "Who?" she pressed. "Emma's sister. The one I called yesterday." His voice was a mixture of hope and dread. "She said she'd visit today." Maddie nodded slowly. And how do you feel about that? Daniel's eyes darkened. I don't know. Part of me wants to run. Part of me wants to say everything I couldn't before. The clock ticked loud in the silence that followed. Jonathan looked up, sensing the tension, but said nothing. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Jonathan cleaned the living room obsessively. Maddie arranged fresh flowers on the table, a small gesture to soften the sharp edges of grief still cutting through the air. Daniel retreated to his room, pacing like a caged animal. When the doorbell finally rang, it cracked the fragile calm like a hammer. Jonathan opened the door. A woman stood there, tall, composed, but her eyes flickered with vulnerability. She looked familiar, yet distant, like a shadow of the past made flesh. Emily, Jonathan said, voice carefully neutral. Thank you for coming. She stepped inside, carrying a small bag, a suitcase of memories packed tight. Daniel waited in the living room, watching her approach. Emily's gaze locked with his, 1,000 unsaid words hanging between them. Hi, Daniel, she said softly. I know it's been a long time. He nodded, throat tight. Too long. The first hours were awkward, a dance around memories both cherished and painful. Emily shared stories of Emma's childhood, moments Daniel hadn't known or had forgotten. Jonathan listened quietly, the old wounds stirring beneath his calm exterior. Maddie observed everything. How Emily's smile faltered when she saw Daniel's scars, how Jonathan's jaw clenched when certain names came up. As night fell, the tension grew heavier. After dinner, Emily pulled Maddie aside. You're the one helping Daniel, she said, voice low. I've heard about you. Maddie nodded. I'm trying. But it's not easy. No, Emily agreed. Emma was special. She loved fiercely, fought harder. Daniel was her world. Maddie felt a pang of guilt and hope tangled together. I want to help him find that again. Emily smiled sadly. Then don't give up. He needs someone who won't. Back in the living room, Jonathan and Daniel faced a silence that wasn't peace. Finally, Daniel spoke. Why did Mom really leave us? His voice cracked, the question raw and honest. Jonathan swallowed. Because she thought it was the only way to save you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Save me? From what? From her own battles, Jonathan said quietly. She fought a war inside she couldn't win. But she loved you more than anything. The room grew heavy with shared grief. Emily joined them, taking Daniel's hand gently. We all carry scars, she said. But they don't have to define us. That night, Daniel slept with Emily's stories echoing in his mind. Maddie sat alone, wondering if the arrival of the past would finally unlock the future. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware that in one penthouse, a family was beginning to stitch together the pieces of a shattered past. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Morning broke slowly over the city, soft light filtering through the blinds into the penthouse where quiet determination was beginning to replace hesitation. Daniel sat by the window, hands resting lightly on his lap, eyes scanning the street below but not really seeing it. Emily joined him, bringing 2 cups of coffee, her presence calm but steady. You're thinking a lot, she said gently. He nodded. About Mom. About everything. She handed him a cup. She believed you could heal. Even when she couldn't. Daniel sipped slowly. I want to believe that too. Maddie arrived then, carrying fresh sheets and a hopeful smile. Today's our day, she said simply. I want to try walking again. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, watching silently. No words needed to be said, the weight of the moment hung between them all. They moved to the therapy room, where the parallel bars waited like silent witnesses. Daniel shifted into position, determination flickering in his eyes. Maddie steadied him, hands firm but gentle. Remember, it's one step at a time. He took a breath, muscles tense. Then, for the first time in years, he took a step forward. Then another. His legs trembled, threatening to give out, but he pushed through the fear and pain. Jonathan's breath caught. Emily reached out, tears shining in her eyes. Maddie's voice was steady encouragement. Step by step, Daniel moved forward, shaky but sure, until he was standing upright and walking between the bars. The room filled with a quiet kind of awe. Afterward, they celebrated quietly, no grand speeches, just small smiles and relieved sighs. That evening, Jonathan opened up about his own fears and failures, sharing stories from his past that shed light on the man he was becoming. Daniel listened, understanding that healing was not just physical but deeply personal. Maddie watched them, her heart full. She knew this was just the beginning of a long road, but the turning point had come. For the first time, hope wasn't just a distant dream. It was real, solid beneath their feet. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally shining through. The fragile peace that had settled over the penthouse began to tremble the moment Daniel felt his first true step. That night, as the city outside hummed quietly, a new kind of silence took root inside, a silence born of uncertainty. Maddie sat beside Daniel's bed, watching him sleep with eyes heavy but hopeful. Jonathan was nowhere to be found, having retreated to the study, the door closing behind him like a barrier between father and son. When Daniel awoke the next morning, the weight of expectation pressed on him. It was different now, not just physical strain but an emotional burden he hadn't anticipated. He looked toward Maddie. "What if I can't keep this up?" she smiled gently. "Then we keep trying." Yet the doubt crept in, a shadow whispering that the progress might be fragile, temporary. Jonathan, pacing the study, wrestled with his own demons. The legacy of his father, the pressure of his empire, the fear that Daniel's recovery was a cruel illusion, all these tangled inside him. When Emily visited that afternoon, she sensed the tension. "We're all afraid," she said quietly. "But fear can either cage us or fuel us." Maddie and Emily conferred privately, agreeing that Daniel needed not just therapy but reassurance, a sense of family that wasn't just about physical healing but emotional survival. Meanwhile, a letter arrived, unexpected, unmarked, its contents stirring old wounds. It was from a distant relative of Jonathan's father, revealing secrets about the family's past. Secrets that threatened to unravel what little trust Jonathan had built with Daniel. The arrival of this letter cast a long shadow over their fragile progress, forcing Jonathan to confront the sins of his lineage and the price of his silence. That evening, dinner was strained. Jonathan's jaw was tight, his usual charm absent. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. Maddie tried to bridge the gap, but the undercurrent of doubt was too strong. Later, Daniel confided in Maddie. "I don't want to fall again. Not just physically. Mentally." Maddie took his hand. "You won't. We're here. All of us." The chapter closed on a quiet storm of uncertainty, reminding everyone that healing was never linear, and sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought within. The days following the letter were heavy, like clouds that refused to part. Jonathan's usual composure crumbled piece by piece, his silence growing louder with each passing hour. Daniel felt it keenly, the walls closing in tighter around their fragile progress. Maddie tried to keep the peace, her voice steady but her heart aching as she watched the family strain under invisible pressure. One evening, the tension reached a breaking point. Jonathan and Daniel clashed, not with anger but with raw vulnerability that spilled over like a dam finally shattered. Jonathan's voice was low but fierce. "You don't understand what I've carried all these years." Daniel's eyes flashed with frustration. "Then tell me. Stop hiding." Maddie stepped in, her hands shaking but firm. "We're stronger when we're honest. No more secrets." The room grew thick with emotion as years of pain and regret surfaced. Jonathan finally shared the dark truths about his father's ruthless decisions, the price paid in broken relationships and lost opportunities. Daniel listened, the pieces falling into place, but the weight threatened to crush him. Emily arrived just then, bringing a breath of fresh air and a reminder that the past didn't have to dictate their future. "We can rewrite this story," she said softly. "But only if we choose to." That night, Daniel lay awake, wrestling with the new truths and his own fears. Maddie stayed by his side, whispering encouragement until sleep claimed them both. The breaking point had come, and with it, the chance to rebuild from the ruins. The morning light was softer now, as if the world itself had slowed to catch its breath. After the storm of confessions and confrontations, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Daniel sat at the breakfast table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, feeling something unfamiliar but welcome. A tentative sense of peace. Jonathan joined him, breaking their usual pattern of distance with a small, genuine smile. "Ready for today?" Jonathan asked. Daniel nodded. "I want to try walking outside." Maddie appeared with a folder of notes and a determined look. "We've planned a gentle path, just outside, near the garden. Fresh air will do wonders." Emily packed a small bag with water bottles and snacks, joining the group with a warmth that had become steady and real. As they moved through the halls, the penthouse seemed to breathe with them, walls that had held years of pain now witnesses to healing. Outside, the sun was warm on their skin, the garden alive with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of birdsong. Daniel took the first step onto the grass, hesitating, feeling the earth beneath his feet for the first time in years. His legs trembled but held. Maddie stayed close, encouraging without rushing. Jonathan watched quietly, his eyes misty. Emily spoke softly about Emma, sharing memories of laughter and hope. With every step, Daniel's confidence grew. The garden wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of new beginnings. The day unfolded with laughter, small victories, and the quiet strength of a family learning to walk forward together. That night, as the city lights twinkled below, Daniel felt the weight of the past lift just enough to let hope shine through. The foundations were new, but solid, built on honesty, love, and the courage to face whatever came next. The days settled into a rhythm, each one weaving strength and hope into the fabric of their lives. Daniel's steps grew surer, and the penthouse echoed with a new kind of laughter, one that had been missing for too long. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the windows, a knock came at the door. Jonathan opened it to reveal a man in a tailored suit, holding a small box wrapped in deep blue paper. "Mr. Harris," the man said, voice respectful but firm. "A gift for your son, from someone who believes in second chances." Jonathan exchanged a glance with Maddie and Daniel, curiosity flickering. The visitor stepped inside, setting the box on the table. Daniel's eyes widened as he lifted the lid to reveal a sleek, high-tech device designed for physical therapy, far beyond anything Maddie had seen before. "This is a cutting-edge exoskeleton," the man explained. "It assists with mobility and helps patients regain strength faster." Daniel's hands trembled as he held the device, the possibilities igniting a spark within him. Maddie felt tears prick her eyes, hope had just taken a giant leap forward. But the gift came with a condition. "The donor wishes to remain anonymous," the visitor said. "But he asked that you promise to keep fighting, to never give up." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "We accept." Over the next days, the exoskeleton became part of Daniel's routine. The device hummed softly, a mechanical extension of his own will, pushing him to walk farther and stand taller. Each session was grueling, the strain testing every ounce of his determination. Yet with Maddie's guidance and the support of his family, Daniel pushed through, the machine unlocking strength he didn't know he had. At night, alone on the balcony, Daniel held the device's manual, tracing the diagrams with a mix of awe and resolve. This could change everything," he whispered. Maddie joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. And so will you. The unexpected gift was more than technology, it was a reminder that hope often comes when least expected, wrapped in the faith of strangers and the courage of those who refuse to give up. The days blurred into relentless practice as Daniel struggled to master the exoskeleton strapped to his legs. At first, every movement felt awkward and mechanical, the weight of the device pressing down like a foreign burden. Maddie's encouraging voice cut through the frustration. "You're doing great. Just one step at a time." Jonathan observed from the sidelines, pride and anxiety warring in his eyes. Emily visited often, sharing stories of Emma's unyielding spirit and reminding Daniel that the path to healing was rarely smooth. One morning, Daniel attempted to walk unaided, his legs shaking violently but holding firm. The living room became a battleground where pain and determination clashed, each step a victory carved from doubt. "You've come so far," Maddie said softly. "Don't let fear win." But progress wasn't linear. Some days, Daniel stumbled and fell, the exoskeleton failing to respond as hoped. Nights brought aching muscles and restless dreams of walking freely, unencumbered. Jonathan admitted his own fears, confessing that he sometimes doubted Daniel's recovery. These moments of vulnerability brought them closer, breaking down walls built by years of silence. As Daniel pushed through, the barriers inside and out began to crumble. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel took a long walk through the garden, the exoskeleton humming steady beneath him. He felt the rough bark of trees, smelled fresh earth, and heard birdsong in a way that made him believe freedom was possible. The machine wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope and human will. The chapter closed on Daniel standing tall, no longer a prisoner of his past but a man breaking through the barriers that held him back. The light in the penthouse had shifted. It was no longer just the harsh glare of struggle but a softer glow, one that carried promise and possibility. Daniel woke early, the exoskeleton waiting beside his bed like a faithful companion. He felt a mixture of anticipation and nerves as Maddie helped him strap in. Today, they planned to try walking down the long corridor beyond the garden, a stretch that symbolized both distance and progress. Jonathan watched quietly from the doorway, his expression unreadable but his heart pounding. Emily sat nearby, offering quiet support. Step by step, Daniel moved forward, the hum of the exoskeleton steady beneath him. His muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed past the pain, driven by something deeper than physical strength. Midway through, a sharp twinge shot through his leg, forcing him to stop. Fear prickled at his skin, but Maddie's voice was firm and calm. "Listen to your body. We'll try again soon." The pause was a reminder that healing wasn't a straight path. Jonathan approached then, laying a tentative hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You're doing more than anyone thought possible." Daniel met his father's eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "It's not just me. It's all of us." That night, Daniel dreamed of walking freely, the city streets alive beneath his feet, the wind carrying him forward. When he woke, the determination was stronger than ever. Outside, the garden bloomed with the promise of spring, new life, new chances. The glimpse of tomorrow was no longer a distant hope but a tangible possibility they were all reaching toward, one step at a time. The penthouse was quieter now, but the stillness carried a weight heavier than before. Daniel faced a choice that felt as vast as the cityscape outside his window: continue pushing through pain and uncertainty or accept the limits fate seemed to impose. Maddie encouraged him gently, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. Jonathan remained distant, caught between hope and fear, his silence speaking volumes. Emily sensed the shift too, offering quiet counsel whenever she could. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, Daniel sat alone on the balcony, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. His thoughts swirled, years of frustration, moments of hope, and the relentless question, what comes next? Jonathan joined him, breaking the silence. "You're stronger than you know, Daniel. But strength isn't just about muscle. It's about heart." Daniel looked at his father, searching for certainty. What if I fail? What if this isn't enough? Jonathan's voice was steady. Then we face that too. Together. The crossroads wasn't just physical, it was a choice about trust, vulnerability, and the future. Daniel realized that the journey wasn't his alone. The chapter closed with Daniel standing at the edge of a new decision, ready to walk forward with the family he'd rediscovered, no matter what lay ahead. The weight of unspoken regrets had lingered in the penthouse for years, but as spring deepened outside, something began to shift inside. Daniel sat quietly in the living room, the soft hum of the city in the background. Jonathan entered, carrying a worn photograph, one of Emma, smiling brightly, the bridge between past and present. "I've been thinking," Jonathan began, voice unsteady. "About everything. About mistakes. About what we've lost." Daniel looked up, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "Can we really move forward?" Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. "Only if we forgive. Not just each other, but ourselves." The conversation opened floodgates long sealed. They spoke of pain and pride, of moments lost and moments yet to come. Emily and Maddie joined, creating a circle of support and understanding. Forgiveness wasn't easy, it was raw, messy, and sometimes painful, but it was the first step toward healing that no therapy or machine could provide. As they shared stories and tears, the family rebuilt its foundation, not on perfect memories but on acceptance and love. That night, Daniel slept with a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The gift of forgiveness had begun to heal wounds deeper than the physical, lighting a path toward a future where they could all walk, together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the penthouse as Daniel prepared for the day's biggest test yet, a public demonstration of his progress, a walk through the bustling city streets where so much had once seemed impossible. Maddie checked every strap and sensor of the exoskeleton one last time, her hands steady despite the flutter of nerves. Jonathan arrived, his usual composed self softened by pride and quiet hope. Emily brought along a small crowd of friends and supporters, their faces glowing with encouragement. Daniel stood tall, the device humming softly as it became part of him. The elevator ride down was filled with a charged silence, the air thick with anticipation. When the doors opened onto the busy street, a wave of emotions crashed over Daniel, fear, excitement, and a fierce determination that had grown with every step he'd taken so far. Step by step, he moved forward, the exoskeleton guiding him through the throng of pedestrians. Cameras flashed, voices cheered, and Daniel felt the city's pulse beneath his feet. The journey was grueling, muscles screamed, and the device resisted at times, but he pushed through, driven by a force beyond pain. At the halfway point, a stumble threatened to undo everything, but Maddie's quick support steadied him. "You've got this," she whispered. Jonathan's eyes brimmed with tears as Daniel completed the walk, the crowd erupting in applause. That night, the penthouse was alive with celebration, not just of a physical triumph but of a family united by resilience and love. Daniel finally understood that the final challenge wasn't just the walk, it was embracing the strength to face life's unpredictability head-on. The city's skyline glittered against the night as Daniel sat quietly on the balcony, the cool breeze carrying memories and hope in equal measure. It had been months since the final challenge, since the walk that marked a new beginning not just for him, but for the entire family. Jonathan stood nearby, hands in pockets, watching his son with a mixture of pride and humility. Emily and Maddie joined them, the four of them a circle of strength forged through hardship. Daniel's legs no longer trembled when he stood, the exoskeleton was a tool now, not a crutch. He felt the solid ground beneath his feet and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. "I never thought I'd get here," Daniel admitted, voice soft but sure. Jonathan nodded. "Neither did I. But sometimes, life surprises you." Maddie smiled. "And sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest truths." Emily added, "Love, family, forgiveness, these are the real healers." Daniel reflected on the journey. The pain, the doubts, the breakthroughs, and the unexpected gift of a little beggar girl's faith. What if I hadn't listened, he wondered aloud. Jonathan put a hand on his shoulder. Then you wouldn't know the strength you have inside. The night settled around them, peaceful and full of promise. Daniel's story had come full circle, from despair to hope, from silence to connection. He realized that while the road ahead would have its challenges, he no longer walked it alone. Life was unpredictable, but love would always lead the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?